Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for coming this morning. I know this might be a bit of a strange talk to come to, especially for a games conference, but I think the theme for this year really suits it, because the theme for this year was the walls we built ourselves. Before I get into who I am, I want to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Bunurong of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future. If you're interested in anything I'm talking about today, this is the book you want to go find. Josephine Macron, Intimacy and Immersive Theatres. This is it. It's the be-all and end-all. As well as going to see more theatre, just in general. And I promise you, the more theatre you see, the greater an understanding of the design of senses you'll get, even if it's terrible, terrible, evil Shakespeare. Don't go see evil Shakespeare. See someone else, someone much better. Who am I? That's me, and I'm not ashamed of it, although I did question why I was going to put it in. My name is David Harris, and I've been a clown for 5 years. I performed in a circus for a while. I then went off and started and finished a degree in Middle Eastern politics and history. And then, it went good for me as well. And then I went off and then did a degree in psychology and game design before going to the VCA and doing an honours in theatre practice. I've toured with companies, I've worked internationally, and as you can see here, I kind of bring performance as happily as I can. And really, my main practice now these days is in immersive theatres, or interactive theatres, and I'm developing a new kind of theatre called responsive theatre, because I think immersive theatres are getting a little bit old now. The zeitgeist is moving, and we must move with it. But really, I teach at Swinburne University in game design and writing for interactive narratives. And theatre and games have been around for a very, very long time. Probably time immemorial, but we do have two of the earliest artefacts that we can date. So the first piece of theatre that we know existed was actually a processional religious piece of theatre based in ancient Egypt, and it was the treasurer who played the god Osiris, guiding people to the underworld, and he got such a good review that we have it several thousand years later on a clay tablet. And that clay tablet is about 1800 BCE. But also we have a board game, and you can actually play this board game. It's called the Royal Game of Ur. It was found in a small tomb somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, I believe it was, and it's a precursor to backgammon. It's really, really smart, and it's really, really hard to play. You're using D4s, by the way, so not even D6s, D4s for us D&D players. And that was around 2600 to 2400 BCE. I just really wanted to emphasise that both these disciplines have been around for an awfully long time. That theatre isn't necessarily greater or grander than game design, and game design is likewise the same. But we often have an understanding from an institutionalised point of view that game is not art, that game is not worthy of note, that game is this new and budding thing, but really, as we can see here, it's actually older than theatre. Look, in an artefact form. In a non-artefact form, definitely not. They've definitely kind of developed together over numerous years. But we kind of have to look back a little bit and figure out where the intersection of game design and theatre really started to occur. And we have the first choose-your-own-adventure. It was a terrible choose-your-own-adventure. The plot goes is that there is a woman and she has two suitors. That's already a terrible plot, you know. Why would you need that in your life anyway? But the woman has two suitors, and it's the audience to decide who she goes with. There's only one choice, and that's it. And there's only one audience member who can choose, and that's Queen Elizabeth I. So it's a really, really, really tight and small role-playing game with not much agency. But it is the first choose-your-own-adventure that we have on record. Maybe there were others, maybe there were some more exciting, but this is the one we have, and that's around the 16th century by a man called Sir Philip Sidney. Now, we're starting to see, especially within theatre circles, that a rise of immersive and interactive game design within theatre practice. And I'm going to show you a short clip. I'm going to show you a short clip from this show. It's called "And the Birds Fell from the Sky" by Silvia Mercioli from a group called Il Pixel Rosso. And I'll just hope this works. Boop, boop. Okay, the sound is very, very quiet. But you don't really need to look at the sound. No, you don't look at the sound. You don't need to hear the sound, just look at the pictures. And kind of just think about, hey, is that game design or is that theatre?
It has been 10,000 years since we last met. You might think that 10,000 years is a very long time, but in fact, it's no time at all. Reach out your right hand. Keep it safe in this hand until the time comes. Before we start, allow Coronte to blindfold you. I'm sorry about the secrecy. Behind you is a chair. Carefully sit down. Don't let go of the envelope. Allow Coronte to help you. So many things have prevented you from reaching me so far. You have been told many lies. It is for this reason that you're now sitting in darkness. Shortly you'll be getting into the car. When the time comes, allow Coronte to help you. You'll keep your arms to your sides, stand up and turn 90 degrees on the spot. Coronte will place your hands on the car seat and then you'll sit down. Okay, ready? Allow Coronte to help you. Get out of the chair and into the car seat. It has been 10,000 years since we last met. You might think that 10,000 years is a very long time, but in fact, it's no time at all. The world was very different then, and you were just a child. So take it from me, if forever were condensed into a single moment, it would be the one we're experiencing right now. And in this moment, I need to tell you everything. Do you remember this place at all? The last time you were here, the trees all around were burning with a fire that reached so high into the sky that the birds fell down like a rain of flaming miniature suns. Hold out your right hand. A keepsake. Remove your goggles and headphones and leave the room.
Okay, so that was a piece called "And the Birds Fell from the Sky" by Il Pixel Rosso. And it has really rudimentary VR. It has really rudimentary VR. It was before the kind of modern wave of VR. Literally goggles attached to people's faces with a blindfold. But the added extra to that is that they have the haptic feedback of the actual players receiving gifts and actually being touched and handled, getting put into cars, and the experience is that the eyes trick the body into believing what they're experiencing. And that's seen throughout VR, and we understand that. But I really love the poetry within that as well. The concept of if all the millenniums were condensed to a single moment, this moment is now, and I must tell you everything. It's kind of what I feel right now. This is not going to be good. Okay. All right, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. The problem with games is it's no, it's not Moulin Rouge. It's spectacular. They're spectacular. They're beautiful. So spectacular means beautiful in a dramatic and eye-catching way. That's awesome. I think we should be very proud of that. I think there are many beautiful, beautiful games out there. But there's a philosopher called Goetz, or an anthropologist called Goetz, and they highlight the limitations in mainstream North American, European and British thinking in the teaching around the sense and perception in order to show how some bearing on social and cultural experience and interpretation is bound up in the sensory order that is established from very early education rather than being a physiological fact. As games move from seats, we are entering into a world that only a few are allowed to operate in or have the deep understanding in experience. If we just need to understand how westernized our concept of sense is, we just have to look towards advertisement. So if we look at the advertisement, there's a hierarchy of senses. Advertisement hits these senses before anything else. And the first one is sight. Sight is spectacular. Sight is literally eye-catching. And it doesn't do much for people who either have a disability in that case, or for people that aren't into the spectacular. The next thing is sound. So sight and sound, they're the really major things that we operate within a Western culture. Video games, if we look at them, they're all sight and sound, mostly. The next one is touch. Well, let's be frank, you can just chuck the rest of them in with touch as well. No one really cares, do they? Especially advertising, they don't care. So we get this really classical Western culture of senses. And we can see in this beautiful picture, the senses are all represented. From the man on the very far, oh, it's your left, I think it is. He is sight, sound. The man in the middle is touch, taste, and smell. You can tell it's smell because he has garlic. That's how you can tell, okay? But also, as kind of science has progressed and developed, we've kind of developed a few more senses. We have balance, space, temperature. I'm going to get this wrong. Proprioception. Anyone want to what is it? Anyone? No? Proprioception. Thank you so much. By the way, this is an interactive format. You're alive here, and I'm alive here, and I hope that we can talk together. So if anyone has any questions, please raise their hand at any time. And hopefully I'll see you. Pain, and of course sexual stimulation. But wait, there's even more than that outside of our philosophies, dear Horatio. We'll have a look at some of the ways that these concepts can help create more immersive environments, ideas, and what the theatre has done in the past to convey them. But why the fuck should we care? Why should we care? Surely sight and sound has served us long enough. How dare you? These are the walls that we built ourselves. Oh, thank you very much. All right, that's the end of the presentation. I'll see you later. Here's a beautiful piece of work by a Finnish company called Unseen Art, and they're a company dedicated to making 3D artworks of classical pictures for blind or vision impaired people. And it's not just about accessibility, because accessibility is something we should always be thinking about at all times. That is just a given for now. This is what we do in this place. But it's also about conveying meaning, experience, and emotion. And if someone can't access something for whatever reason, then they're not accessing your game. They're not accessing your experience. We're going to get into a wibbly-wobbly term right now because a lot of game designers love to use this term, and I think it's absolutely bullshit. It's called immersion. Ooh, immersion. It's a funny term, and it really means very little. I was wondering whether anyone was brave enough to volunteer maybe a definition. No? Yes, interactivity. Here we go. Sorry, at the back. Suspension of disbelief. That is a good one. I don't mind that one. That's pretty good. Anyone else? Nope. Yep, here we go. Yeah. It's all around us. Great. At the back.
Allowing yourself to be engaged with the story.
Fantastic. That's a beautiful one as well.
I'd say achieving a state of flow.
Achieving a state of flow. Ooh, flow. That's a good one. Game design.
Sensory stimulation.
Sorry?
Total sensory stimulation.
Total sensory stimulation. I like that as well. Fantastic. Here are some definitions that theatre has, well, not theatre, but dictionaries have had, and even computer science. But all these are really, really good, but they also mean a lot. They mean a lot. And when we say, hey, let's make this game immersive, you're like, what? Which one am I doing? So here's the actual definition of it. And I don't know how many of your games are so immersive that your players literally dip themselves in bathtubs, but hey, they might be. But here's another one, immersive, that which provides information or stimulation for a number of senses, not only sight and sound. Funny enough, this was defined by computer scientists. Pretty weird, because sight and sound seems to be the only thing they're working with at the moment. Or it's the act of being immersed, deeply involved in a particular activity of interest. There's a game theorist, Collier, and they argue for game designers it means all of these things. Generally, engagement, perceptions of realism, addiction, suspension of disbelief, identification with game characters, and promotional adjective to market games. That's the one I hate the most, I think. I think you hate it as well, because as designers, we want to be clear, we want to be understood, we want to be able to have ideas that we follow along with, not ideas that we kind of left to find out ourselves and ride in the nether. So let's look at theatre. Theatre has three rules or three states of immersion. Immersion as absorption, immersion as transportation, and then total immersion, which is the final kind of beautiful metamorphosis of it all. So let's have a look at immersion as absorption. And we have to look at terrible theatre and terrible cinema for this, okay? It's to engage the participant fully in terms of concentration, imagination, action, and interest. Could be seen as a flow state, or a scale that keeps you within a world. This is the space where you're immersed within a piece of music, movie, but you're not an agent within that world. You can have scenes that are immersive, but they're weakly so. It's still important to be immersed within a world. It's very important to be absorbed, because if you're not absorbed, you're not accessing the information anymore. So it's still critical. Then let's have a look at this one. Immersion as transportation. Did you see a subtle hint? I've changed it from real life to games. It's Bioshock. Someone, ooh, thank you. The player is imaginatively and scenographically reorientated within another place, another worldly experience, and requires navigation through its own rules of logic. It is both conceptual and imaginative. For mediums such as VR and AR, it is the inhabited and physical space, a cohabitation between bodies, thereby fusing imagination and interpretation and interaction. So this is now we're getting to next level. You're leveled up, you've gained enough XP to get to your next level of immersion. That's great. But now we need to go one step further. And remember when I said what the problem with video games was? That it was Moulin Rouge, that it was spectacle? Well, this stops the spectacle. This removes it entirely. Total immersion, involving the above two, in which audience create a meaning from a piece of work, enabling an emotional or an existential transformation. We love games because we've had this experience. We really do, and I've had this experience where games have changed me. And funny enough, when I talk to other theatre makers, some of them go, well, games, or solitaire? You're no, I have characters that I have loved. Don't talk to me that way. And that's beauty, that's total immersion, okay? It works off a concept called presence. And I said to you we're going to be talking about more senses other than the 5 senses later on. Presence is one of them. And it's that point in which we are creating meaning, that we are no longer just looking at spectacle, that we are embodying an event. It's total immersion. Baz Kershaw says the potential for this form has a visceral interrogation of ecological politics, an ecology of immersion, and simultaneously positioning practice as a dynamic force for exploring community, agency, coercion, control, cohesion, and collective power. via immersive participation. It's all well and good to see something. It's well and good to act upon something. It's well and good to act upon something and then reflect. And that's the key thing there. It's that reflection. It's that the immersion is aiding the experience and the meaning that you are trying to establish. Games like BioShock are beautiful in this regard. They're immersive, they're absorbing, they're transportative, and then they also give meaning. Stanley Parable, another example of that, in which you've taken meaning away from the game, not just as a case of point, because the game told you something, but because you were immersed within the game. That by understanding your embodiment within it, you realized your own agency outside of it. Immersion. It's a super slippery term, but it's a term we need to define quicker rather than later. Because as long as the game design kind of keeps using immersion as this slippery term, it's never going to develop outside of that weird wall. Remember Kayala's situation. Immersion arises when an artwork and technical apparatus, the message and medium of perception, converge into an inseparable whole. The principle of immersion is used to withdraw the apparatus from the medium of illusion, from the perception of the observers, to maximize the intensity of the message being transported. The immersive experience arises where the medium and the message are fused, resulting in the totalization of the artwork. Here's a good example. Anyone played Escape from Woomera? It's fantastic. It's a beautiful game. It was made many, many years ago when Woomera Detention Centre was certainly an issue. And I'm very sad to say it's only just progressed. But it was made by a designer to show people how awful the conditions were, and also potentially a way for those people inside to escape. The Australian government was not happy, not happy. Make your governments unhappy. That is my thing, especially this one. Its major concept is the message that it holds. It first absorbs, then transports, then finally it creates total immersion. Okay, so we've talked about immersion. I'm not going to get back into it. We're leaving it behind. Just remember, message as well as transportation. That's what creates total immersion. Well, we talked about senses before. And what has senses got to do with game design? I'm glad you asked. Here are the other senses that I'm going to be talking about today, if I have time. I hope I have time. Space, audience, body, prey sense, synesthetics, and sessalame. In order, that's like the most exciting. The very bottom is the most exciting. First one is space. Space, the final frontier. Whether a suspended pause, a blank area, an empty room, or a limitless cosmos, it performs. This space performs right now. Right now it's performing. I'm a part of its performance. The fact that there's a stage here designates that I am the one to be talking, or whoever is up here is supposed to be talking. You are the audience, but I don't agree with that bullshit. That hierarchy, let's break it down. I would like you to talk to me as well. If the view is all being drawn to this one spot at the end of the room, there's nothing else to look at, no beautiful windows to view from. It is performing. Space is the stuff of architects who construct it, scenographers who abstract it, and experienced by inhabitants immersed within it. So how do we change that for games? So I guess the architects become, what do we think? Level designers, great, fantastic. So architects, so level designers who construct it, scenographers. Scenographers, now that might be a strange term. They're the people who build the space from within. They're like filling it out. Does anyone want to have a guess? Or, sorry? That's a beautiful one. Environmental artists. And finally, the inhabitants who are immersed within it. Players! Congratulations. Theatre 101, we've done it. So I just want to talk about my own practice for a second. Oh God, that's so egotistical. But I want to talk about my own practice for a second. I made a work called I Am Good, and it was a work about exploring whether you're a good person or not, and what makes you a good person. And it wasn't to push a politic, it was actually to make someone feel reflective, and to go, why do I think the things I think? And it was you and one other person, and that's it, one other person. And you're put within a strange, if you can see at the second picture over on the left, is like a plastic curtain. It's actually a plastic corridor. And when you're entered into the space, you're entered in blindfolded, and one person is placed on one end of the corridor and the other person is placed on the other end of the corridor. And we wanted to make, me and an architect that we built the space, we wanted to make sure that the space made you feel okay to be vulnerable. That we wanted you to be focused, and we wanted you to be confrontational, because it was going to be you and one other person discussing why you're good people. And we gave a series of prompts, questions, asking, what would you do in this situation? Or is it okay to do X? Or when is it bad to do Y? And you and this other person would kind of move up and down the corridor depending on your answers. So you'd say, I say yes, I say that is a good thing, or I say no. And then you'd kind of discuss where you're standing and why you're standing where you're standing. And obviously, you're opening up. You're developing and you're kind of growing as people. You're reflecting. And we wanted the space to also grow as well. And that corridor is very claustrophobic. It's focused. So the plastic is actually made water-soluble. It's a water-soluble plastic. And at the very top of it, we have sprinklers. So as the performance gradually occurs and happens, the whole plastic wall begins to melt. And as you reveal yourself, the space reveals it to you. And in the next space, in the next room, as you can see over on the right here, we have envelopes, floor to ceiling as we could get them. I think there was like 600 envelopes, a lot of blue tack. It wasn't very fun. And in as many envelopes as we could, we had received responses to why people thought they were good. And we then, the audience, out of pure curiosity, because the space had revealed itself, would enter into this next room, and they would start reading the letters in the envelopes. And they would have an understanding of what other people thought they were good, why they were here, and what they wanted to say when they had that moment to write down why they were good as well. So the space responded to our audience. The space wasn't static. In fact, there were little messages left behind. We had, I think by the end of it, we had about 60 or 70 responses about why people thought they were good. And then finally, the last part, this is down at Testing Grounds near the Art Centre, not too far away. The very back wall opens up. And suddenly the space is no longer there because your goodness isn't restricted to this theatrical performance. Your goodness is restricted to you and the world around you. So the whole back wall opens up and you're left to wander the world. Thinking about the world, thinking about the space. And the space is a sense. And great level designers and environmental artists already know this, but trying to think of that again, like how can you give your space the opportunity to use your meaning, to have your voice? The next thing I want to talk about is audience. The audience becomes the camera, obviously. We know this. It's a relatively secular society, though. Perhaps theatre and game can provide a place where people come together, explore differences, and by putting differences and creativity together, invent something new. I went to a talk the other day about diverse practices. I thought it was fantastic. And the amount of research putting into diversifying your team is just phenomenal. And we need to have that diversity within our games as well. It's about putting the audience at the heart of that experience. I've got a little anecdote. Again. On the picture to the right, it's a show called Future Carnivals. It was presented in Melbourne not too long ago by a theatre company called One Step at a Time Like This. Beautiful theatre company. And Claire, that's the person on the left, kind of takes you in front of this beautiful curtain and she says, "Can you tell me where you'll be in 1 year's time?" And then I told her. And then she lifts this very light curtain and takes you to a next space. And she says, "Where will you be in 5 years' time?" And I'm having a panic attack at this point. I don't want to think about where I'm going to be in 5 years' time. And I have to tell her, and I say, "I'm going to be here at this stage." And then she lifts a heavy curtain, and I go through it. And she says, 10 years' time. And I'm like, I'm getting very teary at this point. And I tell her, and I get taken under an even heavier, like really heavy canvas curtain. I go through and we get taken to a small room, a small cellar. And the only thing in that cellar is a revolving disco ball and a seat. And she says, "Can you tell me what's happening just before you die?" I started crying. I couldn't think about it. I was just very, very moved. And Claire had allowed me as a participant to be a co-author of the work, to help her, well, she helped me. She helped me be a co-author, to be a participant. And I love the Stanley Parable. I said it's a good piece of work, but the audience in theatre is often more than not exploited. It's not exploited. They're used as and respected as fellow creators. And the Stanley Parable is an exploitative game for its audience. It pokes fun at you. It says that, haha, you thought you knew something, but really you're the chump. And I think games need to understand that an audience is a co-author. That they are helping you create your work and you're helping them create their exploration. That's what we're aiming to do. We're helping people explore. I'm sure Tetris, there's even exploration in that too, I'm sure. So I want you to think about who your audience is and what are you helping them explore, and are you giving them the respect for that exploration? Because that is another sense. I can tell you now, there is a sense of being an audience. Because if I come down and say, it's audience participation time, people are like, oh, definitely don't want to do that. Because that's a sense, you have an understanding. So audience is sense. Audience is sense. I'm going to look at body now. Body. VR, AR. I'm super excited. I'm super excited for it, but I think it's designed really badly. Really badly. As a theatre maker and as someone who's done physical theatre and circus and clowning and, I've done a little bit of dance, I'm always like, why this? Like this is one part of it, but this is so much cooler. And this is like, I can do things with this. This is exciting. Let me do things with this. I'm never allowed to do things with this. I might be getting on my political high horse, but toxic masculinity means that when I wanted to dance as a kid, I wasn't allowed to. And now I want to. I want to dance. I want to do things like that. And how can we as creators kind of allow a social change of our own bodies? People don't get to do what they get to do often in real life, as they can do in games. And in bodies, you become simultaneously sight, and sight. Now, I'll come back to that in a second. And it's a way to look with your whole body. It's a way to use your body that we otherwise might not have. And I really implore VR designers, can you think of ways to use the body that isn't just shooting? Please, for God's sakes. Again, I just talk about toxic masculinity because it's something I'm very passionate about, but men are taught very early on that their bodies are only good for violence and sport. And sport is a simulation of violence, okay? How can we as VR designers kind of create new ways for us to use our bodies? I'm excited to find out. But I talked about sight, and sight as the body, because that's what a body is. And any dancer will tell you this. Any dancer, and they might not have been taught this term, but it's sight, and sight. So I am the game. My body is the game. I'm existing within the game. So I'm the sight, S-I-T-E. But I'm also participating within the game. So when I'm, moving controllers, or even like, so when people play driving games and they might not be, knowledgeable about games in general, and they turn, they're becoming sight. They're actively participating in the game. They are living the game. And finally, they are referenced to the game, C-I-T-E. They are referenced to it. And that reference means that they take that outside of the game world. As designers, you know as good as anyone that games linger on. Games carry with them beyond the screen. And not necessarily in like a malevolent way, like, ooh, but also in a way of like, hey, this is an anecdote. I used to play a lot of Assassin's Creed, and I would start looking at walls and being like, I reckon I could climb that. I reckon I could do that. So how do we do that as well without necessarily climbing on public property? So prey sense is this concept that it prey and sense. It's French. which stands before the senses. It's the participant's physical body responding to an imaginative, sensual environment. Truman, if you want to look up who Truman is, describes immersive theatres that can be seen in the same way to future VR design. So it makes one's physical presence inescapable with no distance between oneself and the work. The edge of one's body is the beginning of the work's sphere. An awareness of the work involves an awareness of one's own body. It is a lived experience. It is being logical, social, cultural, political, and historical. But we need to talk, hopefully I'm going okay for time. We need to talk about synesthetics as well, because now we're getting into this weird state, because we've talked about body and we've talked about kind of sense and prey sense, like our body within imaginative worlds. But now we need to understand that our body is capable of developing senses that we're not using at that time. An example, so I have the beautiful pictures. The one on the left here is a work by a designer called Laia Clos of Barcelona's Mott Studio, and she decided to put classical music with colour. So we have that kind of technical term of synesthesia, where you might be mixing perceptions or senses, and she wanted to see whether that was possible to be done. So I think it's beautiful. Check them out. If you're a classical musician, learn to play in colour. And on the right, we have a little bit of an older one with a Venetian painter, Giuseppe Arcimboldo, and he created lots of work. You might be familiar with the plant man, and it's like a man or a face made up of all plants. And I like that idea again, mixing of the senses. It's the thin aesthetics. That's where we get the word sin. So it's thin. That's from synesthesia. So it's when the audience is encouraged to experience the layers of meaning in the work by becoming a part of the ludic plays, that's gameplay, at the heart of the form itself. A dynamic curiosity is created and ignited, a curiosity that may seek to unearth narrative themes or just to be within the work. Wrapped up in the synesthetic response is the notion that the body is a sentient conduit for the appreciation of artistic work in general and immersive performance in particular. Cognitive processes are disturbed. You're no longer thinking, you're just doing at that point, which causes the individual to experience the ideas and state of their performance in the moment, but also for things to change. Have you ever looked, I'm terrible at this, well, I scroll Uber Eats sometimes, just for fun. And I'm revealing too much of myself. And I get hungry so fucking fast because my sight is telling my body to be hungry. And you can do that too. It's weird because I'm not hungry. I don't have a sense of hunger as I start it, but once I finish it, I'm like, all right, what do I need? What do I need to eat? What burger joint am I buying from today? And you can change the correlation between things. We've seen the power of sight. Sight affects balance. We've seen it when people play VR. When people put VR goggles on and they're on the roller coaster and people are like, whoa. It's because all the synesthetic responses are being crossed over. Okay? So you can do that within design practice as well. You can evoke smell by touch. You can evoke smell generally by taste because they're very, very interlinked. But you can evoke taste through sight. So there's no reason why you can't follow that along and evoke all those senses that we might not otherwise experience just with game design naturally or normally. But finally, I'm getting to the most exciting one of all. Sessa salame. It's roughly translated to perceive at flesh inside, and it comes from the West African Anlo-Ewes people. Sessa salame is a generalized feeling within the body that includes both internal senses, such as balance, and external senses as well, so sight and hearing, as well as perceptual, emotional, and intuitive dimensions of experience. It's really hard to explain this in a Western kind of context. It's hard to explain this outside of a phenomenological idea. And I say phenomenological, and that just means experience, an experienced kind of understanding. But I'm sure you've had it, where maybe you and some other person have had the exact same idea at the exact same time. Or maybe when you've said something at the same time. Or when look, I'm going to come back to game design. Okay. It's like when you're playing Overwatch, yeah, and your team is fucking good, like really good, and you're like working together and you don't know anyone and you're backing each other up and there's no communication going on. It's because you're all experiencing that one state of sessa salame where you're looking at each other and interacting with each other, maybe hundreds of kilometers apart from one another. But you're all keyed in, all in tune, all are operating on the same understanding and the same level. To the Anlo people, they attend and interpret their own bodies while simultaneously orientating themselves to the bodies of those around them, which creates links across sensation, perception, emotion, and reasoning. It is beyond our philosophies, dear Horatio, I'll say again. Because as a Western culture, we're taught, look at the eyes, it's the eyes that matter, or sound, and that's really it. We're taught not to really touch, and we're taught not really to use outside of a scientific rigor of understanding. Unless science says it's possible, it's not possible. And I think that, again, coming back to that theme, are the walls that we build ourselves. And we should look outside of that. Not necessarily in a way that's, spiritual and new age, but in a way that opens our minds up to an understanding of the world is much larger than we might think it be. So VR is dance. VR is dance, and it is experience, and it is body. The human and technical presences is a polyphony of practices, according to Salter. I love that word, a polyphony of practices. So when you're game designers, think outside of your disciplines. Think outside of who you could contact. I think a really good example of a VR that has used body really, really well is zero latency, our local zero latency group. They have understood space, and they have understood concept of the body and the self. The only problem is, sorry, zero latency, your Moulin Rouge. Your spectacle. Remember? Spectacle. Yeah? Lacks that substance. In industry, we need to move beyond the spectacular and into the artistic. Hyper-theatre, which is a terrible form of theatre, is to optimize the spectacle rather than to celebrate the revolutionary identity of art and life. We've got to switch that over. This is Gordon Barney's Morolundi, and it was written up in Canberra. This may not be the most spectacular of exhibitions, but it does illustrate the consistent quality of art emerging from Worum Art Centre and the surrounding communities. Fireworks are spectacular, but they've never made me want to change myself or the world. They've never made me go, oh, you know what? I'm going to be a better person tomorrow. Thank you, fireworks on New Year's Eve. What's the most effective way to communicate that substance? What are we engaging but the senses? Who can help us on this route? And I'm going to rush through this. I do apologise. But if you have any questions for me, please come and find me. I'm more than happy to talk lyrical at you. But there are people in the theatre community called dramaturgs, and it's dramaturgy. And this is what game design really needs at this point, okay? This is what game design really needs. And I'm not suggesting you go hire dramaturgs, because you don't hire dramaturgs. Or do, they need the money. We need to develop as a community our own form of dramaturg. I'm going to suggest interacteurs, but I don't want to take the pulpit. Dramaturgy is a term that refers to both the aesthetic architecture of a piece of dramatic literature, its structure, themes, goals, and conventions, and the practical philosophy of theatre practice employed to create a full performance. A dramaturg is a member of an artistic team of a production who is a specialist in the transformation of a dramatic script into a meaningful lived performance. A dramaturg is an expert in aesthetic philosophy, theatre history. They are strong and versatile writers. They are committed to visionary artists who love being in rehearsal and collaborating with others. They are not scared of libraries. They are devoted to the principle that theatre or games should be socially as well as artistically relevant. They are deeply driven by the aha moment of discovery. They are intrepid, frontline operators willing to go boldly where no one has gone before. They are versatile and adaptable, ready to wear a variety of hats in a variety of different contexts. Basically, you are a far more ethical Indiana Jones, mixed with a dash of the crew of the Starship Enterprise, who always has a plan. But most importantly, you are a caring critic, a caring critic, a person who loves what they are helping and cares deeply about the creators creating it as well. I'm going to go to an Israeli artist called Yair Vardi, because I think Yair Vardi talks about this beautifully. So excuse the rant. This is what they say dramaturgs do for them. To fix my head in general, to bring me back to the ground, to make me a doctor of my conceptual thoughts, to explain to me why I can or cannot do, to tell me what is appearing from my materials, what appearing from my beliefs and how I can communicate them, to make sure I am communicating, to make sure I'm not just presenting my associations of narratives, but my line of thought is communicating a logic that can be understood, to tell me things I don't know, to make me rethink myself and the piece, to make me fall in love with the materials that I thought were stupid, and to break up with the materials that I thought were genius. To make me be clear, to make me be responsible for my own acts, to hold my hand when I am lost, to make me lost and tell me it is okay to be lost, to break my heart when something doesn't work, but to believe in what I am doing to the very end. I am not successful with what I thought I could. To believe in me in the project while at the same time crushing it to dust, asking what I want all the time and making me tell them what I want. To tell me what the piece knows much better than I do. The dramaturg is the most intimate position and person in my process. It should be based on time and love. That is what a dramaturg is, and that's why you need them. On that note, the future of games and theatre I think is awesome. I think we're really on a verge and on a cusp, an interdisciplinary practice that could be flowered here in Melbourne, who knows? But let me incentivise it for you. You have Film Victoria funding. You have Creative Victoria funding. Theatre and games have separate funding. If you want more funding, work with theatre makers. On that note, thank you so much. This has been Design of Senses. Have a great day.